Welcome back to the Commanders Declassified. What did I say? Declassified. We're British tonight. We're
Yeah,
declassified.
declassified. Pinky out.
Welcome back to the Commanders Declassified podcast, your home for all things Washington Commanders. The off season is whittling away, and guess what? Training camp is around the corner. I think we're all very, very excited about that. Let's check in with the fellas. Eric, how you doing?
No complaints. Hanging out with Albert and Audrey once again.
Two of the best. Brian, how you feeling today?
Feeling good. We got the doldrums of just kind of waiting for training camp and waiting for sale news. So, whole lot of waiting happening.
Yeah, there is. But after the waiting comes the training camp, and then comes the season. So a lot of things to be excited about, a lot of things to talk about. But first of all, the league is begging the Detroit Lions to be on Hard Knocks because evidently nobody wants to do it, including the Commanders. I wouldn't mind seeing season two of the Lions on Hard Knocks. I think they have a good coach for that, and they kind of have a good group for that. I don't think they have Jamal Williams anymore, who was sort of the star of that show last camp. But I think it'd be interesting. I'm not overly interested in seeing the Commanders on Hard Knocks. What about you guys?
Oh,
That would be the only reason I would watch it because I've literally never seen an episode of Hard Knocks in my life because I just don't care enough. And I even have like Max, right? Like I could watch it. I just don't get around to it. So if they were on it, I would watch the Commanders. Otherwise, I probably won't watch anyway. I'd at least check it out.
I think the Commanders would be great. We've got the guy, right? Eric Bieniemy, right? He should be a head coach. People don't know. Can he coach? Can he not coach? I think he would be a star. I think this defense, there's a couple of defensive guys who would be great. And I think just this team in general, right? Like we've got to get out from behind the black cloud of Dan Snyder, right? He's going to sell this team. It's happening. We're, probably another couple of weeks away from hearing that announcement. And people need to realize, like, there's some good things happening here. Is this a Super Bowl team? No. But hey, that doesn't mean that there's not, right? Look what it did for the Detroit Lions, right? They're perennial dumpster fire. Hey, everyone sees them and they're the darlings now, right, of the NFL. So I think it could help so much. And with a new ownership coming in, and we want to jumpstart this era, this new era, get some more fans, some newer fans, maybe some younger fans. I think this would be a great thing to show some of the the young guys that we have, some of the talent like Terry McLaurin. I think he would be great on that. Eric Bieniemy, absolutely. Some of these defensive guys. So I'm in for it.
Well, I think the Dan Snyder talk is one reason the league probably doesn't want the Commanders on because that's going to be the transition of the team. Looks like it's going to be happening right around training camp. And you can't cover this team without talking right now, at least about Dan Snyder. And I don't think the league wants anything to do with that. So I think that's one big red mark against them or strike against them on that. I just think the league doesn't want to have to deal with the Dan Snyder thing. They just want him to be gone. And I think that will probably be what keeps the Commanders off of Hard Knocks this year.
But if they announce the sale and then they announce it July 20th, and then after that, boom, you've got Magic Johnson taking center stage in this Hard Knocks thing. He's walking around training camp. I mean, let's talk about him. Let's not talk about Snyder. So I think they could do it. If the other teams don't want to do it, give it to us. Like, we need something good.
I bet that if we don't get it this year,
and Snyder, they want to pretend like he never existed.
Yeah.
So he'll be on. The Commanders will be on it eventually, but I don't think it'll be this year.
Yeah. It'll be next year. If it's not this year, I can almost guarantee it. It'll be next year. Brian lost. True.
Yes, it'll be next year. It'll be next year.
Lost in what Brian said is that he's finally coming around on Dan Campbell and the Detroit Lions. He's a believer now. No. I see it. He doesn't want to admit it, but he sort of referred.
I like the offensive coordinator. He's good, Ben Johnson. That's the only good coach over there.
I think the Lions had like a top 10 Super Bowl odds at this point too. Did you guys see that this week? I thought that was interesting, but
hopefully getting a little out of control with the Lions.
Hopefully they're talking about us like that pretty soon.
Hey, Jared Goff went to a Super Bowl once, so all right, I'll buy that.
There you go. Dan Campbell is your favorite coach now. The Chase Young, I don't even want to call it a rumor. I think it was just somebody posted something on Twitter about the Steelers' interest in Chase Young. There's no way that happens, right, guys?
Dude, you're going to get what, a 4th round pick? I mean, right. I'm sorry. Even if if it's 1 year, one more year with Chase, he's better than what a 4th-round pick is going to get you. I just don't see him getting traded this year. Bradley Beal will get traded before Chase Young does.
Facts. Yeah.
Yeah, the time to trade Chase was before the draft. If there was going to be a serious offer, a 2nd-round pick, 3rd-round pick, multiple picks, or a player, right? Like, hey, give me a young starting guard, left guard, or something like that. That was the time. Now we're past that. We've got the season almost upon us, training camp. Like, there's nothing that anybody's going to offer us that would be worthwhile to do it. So I'm sure Ron thought about it, and we heard those rumors right before the draft, right? And if those rumors popped up, there was probably something to it. But I think at this point now, I think he's with us for the season, and we just got to hope for the best.
And the Steelers have TJ Watt. It's not like they struggle for pass rush, right? Like TJ Watt is probably what, a top 3 or 4 pass rusher in the league, what we sort of hope Chase Young would be.
Yep.
They also have Cam Hayward and Alex Highsmith. They have pass rush. They're not desperate anyway for it. You can always get better, but I just don't know what Chase Young brings to the Steelers that they don't already have. You know what I mean? Especially for any sort of draft capital. I think what's best for Chase Young is to be in Washington. I think what's best for Washington is for Chase Young to be here. And I think that's exactly what's going to happen this season. I think we got to cool our jets on these rumors and get focused on what's actually going on the field. And we're going to talk tonight about Jahan Dotson. He's a guy that I don't think a lot of people are woken up to yet, right? Like, he is such a phenomenal talent. And Ron Rivera, to his credit, last year bypassed on some receivers who I want to talk about to see if you guys still agree on passing on those guys to get Dotson. And for what we saw of Dotson, he had a really good year, especially to start the season. Cooled off a little bit at the end of the season, or towards the end of the season. I think he had a good game against Dallas. So going back to the 2022 draft, Garrett Wilson went first to the Jets. I think he was the first wide receiver taken, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
Oh, no. He wasn't. Drake London was the first wide receiver taken. Yeah.
Yep.
Drake London had 866 yards. He played all 17 games, and he had 4 touchdowns. Now, Drake London also played with who was his quarterback, right? Marcus Mariota. So he may as well play with a guy with 2 left feet for hands throwing the football. But, he had a productive season. There were some slumps in that. Drake London was rumored to come to Washington, too. I think he was one of the guys that Washington really liked in the draft last year. I think we all said, please don't let that happen. But, he proved to be a solid NFL receiver. Garrett Wilson to the Jets. He had 1,100 yards and 4 touchdowns. And he was playing with the hodgepodge of quarterbacks that I couldn't even name right now. Zach Morris, Zach Wilson, I'm joking.
AC
Zach Wilson.
Slater.
AC Slater.
Screech.
Mike White.
Mr. Beldy.
Guy from
Mr. Beldy
Varsity
was in there at one
Blues.
point.
Yeah. Just a bunch of guys. And he still found a way to get over 1,100 yards. So I think you have to credit that. The guy that was there, or would have been there if we had kept our original pick, Chris Olave, went to the Saints. He had 1,042 yards in only 15 games, 72 catches, and 4 touchdowns. So he had an absolute phenomenal season as a wide receiver. And I do think that he and Dotson are going to be connected at the, in comparison for the rest of their careers. George Pickens, a 2nd-round pick, he played 17 games, 800 yards, and 4 touchdowns. He
may be the best of the bunch.
I think you really have you're onto something there. I think he's up there with that top echelon of guys. His quarterback play wasn't great last year. Kenny Pickett came on at the end in terms of winning games, but they were not an explosive offense by any stretch of the imagination. So if Pickett grows, then I think Pickens is going to be insanely good. But their quarterback position has to develop a little more. Now, here's a guy that really wasn't talked about enough, Christian Watson with the Green Bay Packers. I think he went late in the 1st round, I believe, was it? No, it wasn't the 1st round, was it? Yeah. It was later in the draft. Yeah. He had 611 yards and 7 receiving touchdowns. He played in 14 games, and they didn't really throw. Early on, he wasn't really doing much, and then he caught fire.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he dropped a bunch of passes at the beginning, and then he got better as the season went on. So,
Yeah.
yeah, he was the guy, height, weight, speed, had all the measurables, and it took some time for that one to gel with Christian Watson.
It did, but he turned it on into the season.
Yeah.
Alec Pierce from Indiana, or who played for the Colts. I didn't know he played in 16 games. He had 593 yards, so essentially 600 yards and 2 touchdowns. Rashid Shaheed. This is a guy from the Saints, right? Somehow the Saints found a lot of ways to get a lot of guys, a lot of footballs.
Yeah.
He played in 12 games, 488 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So Treylon Burks was a guy that we all liked a lot, and he was basically a kind of a wash there in Tennessee. Now, he'll have some opportunities as he continues to develop. So those are the major guys that were rookie draft picks last year. Are there any one of those guys that you look at and say, man, I would really, really take that guy over Jahan Dotson at this point?
I think for me, the top guy that I had in that draft was Garrett Wilson. I think he's excellent wide receiver, and I think he should have a good year with Aaron Rodgers throwing him the football. And a little bit more consistency there. So outside of that, like I wasn't a fan of Drake London, and I think we saw him up close. Like he was the number one target there. So those 800 yards, that's okay. But if you look at a lot of his games, I mean, he doesn't separate very well. He's a bigger body guy, 6'5". Tries to kind of box guys out, but he was the only guy they had. They, for whatever reason, kind of didn't target Kyle Pitts, a really athletic tight end that they have there in Atlanta. So he got a lot of balls just by virtue of being the only one there. But yeah, I think Garrett Wilson, absolutely, you can say you're right. The Chris Olave and Jahan Dotson, they're kind of going to be measured together because they were both available at the pick that we had before we traded. So we'll see how that goes. The other guys, not so much, but George Pickens, I think you're right. I think if Pickett continues to progress like how he progressed at the end, he's going to be a star because he looks awesome, and he makes some incredible catches. Like the level of difficulty is unbelievable with some of those catches he makes. So I think Jahan is right up there with those guys.
Yeah, I mean, Garrett Wilson was my guy last year. He's my favorite receiver last year. Olave, I think we'll probably get into this. Olave and Jahan Dotson are basically the same guy. And if I know that the overall numbers look kind of staggering if you look at them like in a vacuum, but when you really break it down, I mean, they're really, really similar players. And you look at like yards per catch, and like, Dotson literally had half of the yards. He had half of the catches on half of the targets, right? Like it's almost like they're the same guy. They're the same yards per catch. I think Dotson had some touchdowns, and so I think, those guys are going to be compared. I think they are very similar guys, whereas Olave was the main target in New Orleans. Obviously, Jahan Dotson was not the main target last year. Terry McLaurin was. Like if you had a healthy Michael Thomas, which is never going to happen again, but if you had a healthy Michael Thomas, Olave probably doesn't get that many targets. He probably doesn't get that many catches. George Pickens is to me. I don't want to be a hater, but he's like he's a highlight player. He makes amazing catches that probably elevate his stock in the public opinion because that's really all you see. He's a Sports Center player. Is he like that dude every down going to be the man? We'll see. I don't know. I'm not he almost reminds me a little bit of Drake London in that respect, whereas I think he's a better receiver than Drake London is. Not that Drake London's bad, right? Like he had a better year than I thought he would. Drake London is going to be like an Anquan Bolden type of receiver for his whole career, which if he can pull that off, great. I mean, that's the kind of player he is, though. He's not a big separator, but he's a big physical guy. He's going to get his numbers just because he's bigger and stronger. But he's never going to be, that, 1,500 yard, 17, 18 yard per catch guy. But Pickens, Pickens reminds me, as again, I'm going to date myself. Pickens reminds me of like an Alvin Harper type. If you remember Alvin Harper back when he was like this monster with the Cowboys playing opposite. Well, he was playing opposite Michael Irvin, and he just made these ridiculous catches. But like he wasn't like the most reliable guy. We'll see with Pickens. I didn't watch enough of him to know that, but he really, from what I saw of him last year, he really just seems like he's that Sports Center player that everybody's going to love. But when you look a little closer, he may not be that guy. And I'm sure the Steeler fans will find this and come at me because they're generally very level-headed, rational people when you badmouth one of their players. But it is what it is. Anyway, so I'm happy with Jahan Dotson. I think Olave would have been great at 11, but to get Dotson at 16 and get an extra pick, I think that was a better deal for us. And I think they're going to be very similar players throughout their career. And hopefully with some better quarterback play, they can both improve drastically.
I think Eric had the best point, though, is that all those other receivers that we're talking about, they're the number one option on their team, right? They're going to get all of the targets, all of the first reads, the first looks from their quarterbacks. Like, they're all number one guys on their team. Even as rookies, they were the number one option. Jahan isn't or wasn't. I mean, he was, you could honestly say probably the number 2 or sometimes number 3 option, with us, even though, Terry should have been the number 1 option. he was number 2 sometimes or number 3. So I think with the way the offense was last year, I think if, we had Bieniemy last year, you could have seen Jahan pop even more than what he did last year with some, proper scheming and things like that.
I think for the first part of the season with Wentz, Jahan Dotson was the number 1 option in the early part of that season, that offense, when he was scoring all those touchdowns.
In the red zone, yeah.
I remember us talking about that distinctly on the podcast, that they weren't targeting Terry enough. Then he got hurt, right? And then that changed. And even when he came back, it was like he was MIA for a few games, and then he started having. We'll get into that a little bit more as we go. But you're right. All in all, he wasn't the number 1 option throughout the entirety of the season. He just had a stretch early on because Terry, I think, was out of camp, right? And he didn't develop that chemistry, if you remember, with Wentz early on, and Dotson was there. And I remember when Eric and I were out at OTAs, we saw Dotson catching deep balls from Wentz, and we were like, oh, this is going to be special. Now, Wentz turned out not to be special, but Dotson was. For me, of the wide receivers that we talked about from last year's draft, it's really hard to separate them. I think that I would put Wilson and Olave above the others, but not by a ton. I think it's not to the point where I would say, oh my God, why didn't we get Olave? Because you have to look at the full package that we got in return, right, for that trade. But if we had gotten Olave, I would not be upset whatsoever, because he's a phenomenal player as well. I do like Pickens, Brian. I'm with you. Yeah. I like his athleticism. Oh, yeah. He's a kind of receiver we don't have. So I think I'd be really curious to see what he would do for the mix that we have right now to kind of blend. I think it would blend better, or at least, fill in for some areas that we're not currently covered at the receiver position. But that being said, I really like what we have in Jahan Dotson. So Brian, you talked about Dotson and the number 1, number 2 thing. In this offense with Bieniemy, I don't think it's as apparent who the number 1 is. So I think that works well for us. But when it comes to Terry and Jahan, if you were just to put them on a team together and just say, hey, I'm naming somebody number 1, I'm naming somebody number 2, who would be your number 1 out of those 2?
For me, I still would go Terry number 1. I think Jahan could be a number 1 in his own right. I think, with Terry and kind of his all-around game, I think Terry is the number 1. But it's not. I don't think it's a huge gap right now. Now, Jahan may blossom this season, and we may have to look at it and go, okay, maybe Jahan is the number 1 and Terry's the number 2 to him. We've got to see how this season plays out. But Jahan certainly has that level of ability in him. But I would go Terry. I mean, he's just a complete receiver. He does everything well. I mean, there's all these stats about how he is I think he's like 4th in contested catches since coming into the league, and that was something he didn't even know he had to do that because of really poor quarterback play. He had to come back and fight for the football. So I mean, he added a lot of things to his game and has a lot of things in his game. And I think Terry, because we've had such poor quarterback play, we've lost sight that he's an excellent route runner. Like Terry, in his rookie year, I mean, some of the routes he was running when he had those 7 touchdowns in his rookie year, I mean, they were just excellent. I mean, he would make his cut, and then the defender would be the opposite way. Like they wouldn't be near him. There was that one in the corner of the end zone to the Dolphins that year. I was just like, wow, So I think we'll get to see a lot more of that this year in this offense, where things have to be precise and the football has to be on time. So I think we'll again kind of see how good he is running routes. But yeah, I would go with Terry number one, but not by a big margin.
Okay, Eric, do you agree?
Yeah, I would put Terry at number one based on body of work thus far. I mean, Terry's proven that he can beat anybody in the league whenever he wants to. But they have different skill sets, right? Like they're just different. They're both similar size wise. I think Terry's a little heavier and stronger, but when you look at the contested catches that both of them made last year, they were just different. Like Jahan would go like over or around or under you to make like this really like nifty catch, whereas Terry would just let the defender get his hands on it and just rip it away from him and laugh. Right. That's just the way that they do. That's the way they do. So I think they're really good complement for each other. I think personally, Dotson probably has a higher ceiling at this point based on the fact that he's only 23. We've already seen like what a good route runner he is. And guys who can run routes like that can play in the league for a long time, even smaller guys like him, because that's just a skill that gets you open. So he's also very fast right now. I mean, he's still like a 4.35 guy, but he, the fact that he's that fast and he runs routes that well is just really bodes well for him to have a good career as long as he stays healthy. He did have a couple of drops late last year, which were a little irritating for me because, he had shown that he has really good hands for most of the year. I just had like a couple, like one or two games in a row, maybe 3 games in a row where he had like a drop. It was like, wow, what are you doing? But I'm sure that was, I don't think that was a thing. It's nothing to worry about at this point. We'll just, keep an eye on it. If it keeps happening, then he's good for a drop a game. But I think his ceiling in the NFL, I think is a lot higher. And if he has kind of the rapport like with Sam Howell, like what he had with Carson Wentz last year, going into this year, I think you can look for big numbers for Jahan. But right now, I would put Terry ahead of him because, I mean, Terry's been there, done that for 4 years now, and he's been amazing all 4 years he's been here. He's consistent. And you know what you're going to get from him. But yeah, long term, Jahan's got a really high ceiling.
Yeah, I think there's a pretty wide gap between Terry and Jahan right now, and with Terry in the lead, obviously, I think we're projecting a lot when it comes to Dotson, and I think rightfully so because I think he's shown that he has that talent level. But we're basing this off talent. But in terms of the receivers that they are right now, we've seen Terry do it against anybody and everybody, including the best of the best at the cornerback position. And while I think that Jahan Dotson has the potential to do it, we just haven't seen it yet against the best consistently, right? Because he hasn't had the chance to. And that's not a knock on him. It's just about the experience that Terry has shown up and proven himself through. So I can't close the gap yet. Dotson had 533 yards last year, something in that range. And Terry, throughout his career has been consistently above that with horrible quarterback play. And I think you could even argue that one of Dotson's games came with a better quarterback than Terry had played with all his time in Washington, right?
Yeah.
With the Sam Howell game last year. And even though it was a very, conservative game plan from the Commanders in terms of the opportunities they gave Howell, still the play was better than what you got from Carson Wentz, right? And that's coming from me, right? So, I think Terry's there, and I think it's a pretty big gap. But I think when it comes to NFL star power, I think Jahan Dotson is head and shoulders above what Terry is, or has the potential to be head and shoulders above what Terry is.
I think another way to look at it that people should consider is, Terry's going to go up against the other team's number 1 corner. Put Jahan on the other team's number 2. I mean, do you ever take the other team's number 2 cornerback over Jahan Dotson? Like, I wouldn't. I mean, I don't know, a lot of the team's other number 2 cornerbacks. I know they're number 1s. If Terry's taking that guy and Jahan is matched up on that, I mean, I got to assume that's a win for us most times, right? 9 times out of 10. And that's a position you want to be in, right? As an offense and as a play caller for Eric Bieniemy. So I like that matchup, and I like that skill set of having Dotson across from Terry.
I like it too. Yeah, I'm with it, man. Dotson had 6 drops last year, by the way. I just looked it up. So yes, there is a bit of a drop concern developing. It doesn't mean it's going to plague him for his entire career, but it's real, right? And it needs to be addressed this season.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he will, because he seems like the type of player that's going to work on, that kind of thing. Hey, when we were doing our review of the draft, we came up with some comparisons for Jahan Dotson, right? And while I'm looking this up, I'm also looking up the drops for Terry McLaurin. You know how many he had last year? Three.
One, maybe three.
Three.
Yeah. Okay.
Three. That's
Yeah,
it.
I was surprised by Jahan. 6. That's a lot.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
did, and he had them. They were like over the last like 3 or 4 games too. They had several.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. All right. So Jahan Dotson, when he was coming out of college, I said T.Y. Hilton, and I felt pretty good about that comparison.
Oh, I
After
remember
having
this. I'm gonna
seen
get
him
roasted.
play, after seeing
Sorry.
him play for a year, I like the comp. I think T.Y. Hilton is supremely accurate for what we're getting out of Jahan Dotson. Eric, do you remember who your comparison was?
I believe it was Deshaun Jackson.
Yeah,
Is that
you should
right?
get roasted for that. Yeah.
I'll stick with it though. I think he can do it. I think he's got more of he's got a broader skill set than Jackson. Jackson just had that raw speed and the ability and the ability to get open. But the method you can deploy them is going to be similar. Although I think Dotson's got a better route tree than Deshaun Jackson did. My opinion.
I agree. Yeah, I think he's such a complete receiver, or at least has the capability. I don't want to put it on too much, but he has the capability to be a complete receiver. I don't think that Deshaun Jackson was ever interested in fulfilling the roles of some of that dirty work that receivers have to do. Brian, who was your comp? Do you remember?
I believe I said Santana Moss. They just the thinner body guys, just the way they run. Like when they run straight out, every route looks the same right up until they make their break. And I just thought, those two look very similar. And even after watching this season, I don't think there's really, I think for me, I thought that was a decent comparison. Will he get there? We'll see. But I think that was all right.
He has. So I agree in the sense that they're both really smooth athletes and very smooth runners. Where,
Mm-hmm.
with Terry, he is so fast, but you see him running fast when you watch him, right?
Yeah.
Dotson looks like he's floating, just like Santana Moss did.
Yep.
And they both, are really, really nimble guys, and very strong at the point of attack for their size. So I don't hate that comp. I just think Santana Moss is so high in our history and our lore that I hate putting guys against him like that, or at least comparisons, because you're automatically going to start talking yourself out of it the moment it comes out of your mouth, So
Santana Moss is a guy, not to go too far off subject. Santana Moss is a guy who I think just played in the wrong era. I think if Santana Moss played today, he would be a much more highly regarded player even than he was back then. I think the ways you could use him today, like a guy like Bieniemy or Andy Reid could find a way to work with him in today's kind of offenses. I think he would be unbelievable if he played today.
Absolutely. Yeah. Could you imagine Santana Moss in a Tyreek Hill role? How they deployed Tyreek Hill in Kansas City? Whew, he would just be outstanding. I mean, you look at some of the other receivers around the league like that are also deployed in a similar fashion. Look at the guy from Philly. They're number 2, Devontae Smith, and there's just so many guys that I think Santana Moss is better than that. I agree, Eric. If he played today, he would be unstoppable, like insane. And he was good for when he did play in a much more physical era. Hey, what about the wide receiver combination? So we got McLaurin and we got Dotson. I'm not forgetting about Samuel, but I'm going to leave him out of this discussion for now. In terms of a 1-2 punch, guys, how high up the receiver combos are those two guys in comparison to some of the other teams around the league?
I mean, there are some really good ones. I'd put them up there with just about anybody. They're different. It's a different offense and they're different players. But I mean, obviously the two guys in Philly are going to be really high up there. The two guys in Miami are going to be all the way up there. The Jets now. So there's a lot of good combos, but I think, potentially, obviously, McLaurin and Dotson could be, one of those top 5 type receiver combinations. They're legit. I mean, they're potentially really good. Just depends on the quarterback play.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you're just looking at skill set and those two guys of having that level of talent between the two, I think you could easily say top 10 wide receiver duo. And I think Eric nailed it. I think the Miami duo, not that they're the same players, but how they're going to be deployed, because you're talking about that coach down there runs a West Coast system. zone run scheme is going to be very similar to what we're going to run here. And it's a lot of timing based. They have to be precise with their routes. The ball has to be on time. I think you're going to see them deployed in that similar fashion where they're going to run the football out of various formation, and these receivers are going to be a lot of slants, crossing routes, all of these things to where they're in space. They can catch, run, turn it upfield for big gains, which is a lot of what they do in Miami. So I think, something comparable to that type of production, for our guys is very possible. Hopefully it happens. We got to see, but I think that's if you want to kind of imagine what it's going to look like, I think that offense is probably the closest thing that you're going to get to.
You got a lot of faith in this offense, man, and I appreciate that because that Miami offense was out of this world last year. I will say, I think Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins are
I forgot about them.
Two pairs are way up here, and I think everybody else is about a tier or two below those groups. Then you get into the let's see, AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, and I think that's a really tough comparison. But I think that's where I sort of slide us in is right with those guys because though AJ Brown is awesome, I love AJ Brown. He's physical, he's big, he's dominant, he's my favorite kind of receiver. I think us with Dotson and McLaurin, AJ Brown, Devontae Smith with the Eagles, and DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett with the Seahawks, I think they're in that tier. And any order you take out of those three, I'm not going to be mad at you for it. You know what I mean? Because I think there's all really, really good wide receiver pairings. So
don't sleep on the Chargers, man. They're injured all the time, but when they're healthy, my guys Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, those guys are still as good as anybody when they're on the game. 4 times a year.
Well, you're right. The injuries are crazy, but they are absolutely. Keenan Allen's getting a little old, I think. Right? How old is Keenan Allen?
He's probably early 30s now, but he's kind of what I was talking about with Dotson earlier. If you can run routes at that level, you can play a long time in the league, and he's a prime example of it.
So he'll play till his mid 30s. Mike Evans and Chris Godwin too, another one of the Hurt Locker combo. But I don't know. Mike Evans I like a lot, but I don't love Mike Evans because I feel like most of what he does is because he's big, right? And Chris Godwin is a very good receiver who is never healthy and will always destroy your fantasy football season.
And not consistent. He's not consistent at all.
You got to think about some of these wide receivers, these pairs, these trios. They're utilized correctly. Like, I mentioned the stat for Terry's 4th most contested catches. Like, that's not what Terry's designed for, right? Like, that's not his game. Like, Ellie, you like AJ Brown. That's something AJ Brown would be great at, right? Some of those contested, those jump balls, those comebacks, like that. He would be great in, however we were using Terry these last couple of years. He would have feasted in that type of role. And I just think our guy's skill set was so mismanaged that we couldn't see. We never really got to see what they're capable of, right? Like Terry's, having to run a full route and then fight his way back to catch a football and then get his head knocked off by a middle linebacker. So hopefully this year we can see them utilized correctly, like we see all these other guys, right? Like Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. We see them catching the ball in space and being able to turn it up and go, 40 yards downfield unencumbered. So hopefully we get to see something like that because that's how our guys should be used, not these jump balls and contested catches. Like they can do it, but that's not really what they're best at.
And I don't think the jump balls and contested catches are intentional. Well,
no, it's not
the result of bad quarterback play.
Yeah,
awful quarterback play.
Yeah, exactly. But if we could use them the right way, how much better would it look? And that's kind of my thing.
Well, and that's what Sam Howell or Brissett, if that somehow comes to fruition, is tasked with this year, right? Don't make our receivers work so hard to be effective to make up for their crappy quarterback play. They have gotten punished throughout their career, and it doesn't matter who it is. If you've been with the Commanders or the Redskins or the Washington football team since, I don't know, 2012. Well, I can't say that. Kirk Cousins was not that bad, but look, I know you're going to light up the comments for me saying that, but from a quarterback getting the football to the playmakers, he was good at that. So anytime after that era, I think, you suffered immensely because of the poor quarterback play. By the way, What would Jordan Reed do in this offense that we're about to put together this year, man?
He get hurt.
Yeah,
He
that's true.
concussed, yeah. No, that's fair. But if he was healthy, it'd be great, right?
If he was
So
healthy, yeah.
He'd probably have like a 6-game run of like 150 yards receiving, and then boom, he'd be out with a concussion after that. So yeah.
yeah, that's fair. That's fair. By the way, did you guys know that Terry and Todd Gurley are the same age? I always find it weird about Terry
Yeah.
McLaurin's age.
Wow.
Yeah, he came in the league. He was like a 5-year player at Ohio State, and came in the league when he was like 32. So
Yes, on Medicare. That's right. No, but so we all think that Dotson is going to really do well and ascend inside of BNME's offense. Is there any concerns, Brian? Do you have any concerns with Dotson and sort of his growth path here?
The only thing that's gonna impede him is health. We saw him hamstring in it. What was it? 5 games, 6 games? Even I think maybe 6 games, 5 games with the injury, and then the game he came back, he still didn't look fully up to speed. He looked a little gimpy, a little slow. So with some of those smaller guys, injuries are a concern. He was 5'11", 185, I think, when last year. Now, there were reports that he put on a little bit of weight, but, a guy like that, he's never going to put on a bunch of weight. So he's probably if he was 185 last year, he's 190 this year or 195. And hopefully that helps him stay healthy. But that's my biggest thing, because even if he gets average quarterback play, and with the type of design of this offense, he should be fine. He should produce a lot with just kind of average QB play. So, injury for me, that's going to be the biggest thing for a smaller type player like that.
Yeah.
yeah,
What about
same
you,
thing.
Eric? What concerns you? Same thing.
I'd say the same thing. Yeah, it's just that really derailed his season last
Oh,
year
yeah.
because when he came back from the injury, he had a new quarterback who he hadn't worked with, and he didn't have the rapport. It took him, he missed the 5 games, and then it took him like 3 or 4 games to start getting targeted. I mean, those games, like right after he came back, look, he's got like 1, 2, maybe 3 targets in those games. This just wasn't going to cut it. So it was those last like 5 games of the season, he finally got on the same page with Heineke, and his numbers came up to kind of show that. So, but it was an injury last year. I mean, go back to college. He was healthy for the most part in college. I think he missed 3 games total in college. It was a hamstring injury. Those happen to fast guys. Hopefully he knows to warm up and stretch a little better. And, we can avoid that moving forward. But being that it was a 1-year thing and he didn't have a long history of, hamstring problems prior to that we know of, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. But yeah, I think if he stays healthy, he can have a big year this season.
Yeah, I agree with that. Health is a big thing. I want to see what he is without the touchdowns, and I think a lot of why people think so highly of him is because of those 7 touchdowns. But most of those came in the first few weeks of the season. I want to see him be consistent and not be dependent on touchdowns for his stats. Like, I love him getting the touchdowns, but I just want to see that he can perform outside of the touchdown catches, right? I don't really have concerns for Dotson. In the next 2 to 3 years, we're going to really find out if he can be a wide receiver 1, right? Because Terry, with his age, he's going to be 28 in September, I believe. Look, guys like, when they turn 30 in the NFL, it's a thing, right? So Dotson's probably going to have to transition into that number 1 wide receiver role in a couple of seasons. Can he do it? Can he carry the water at that position? I think he can. It's just going to take some additional development from him. But I'm looking forward to watching it. I think, this wide receiver group that we have now is so far and away improved from when that year that we were signing guys off the dumpster, out of the dumpster, right, on 8th Street in DC. Isaiah Wright, remember that guy? Like, that season when we had those guys was so incredibly frustrating to watch. Jeff Bidet, those guys were our like wide receiver 2 in games, and it was just a miserable thing to watch. And now we have a really good and competent group of wide receivers. I could not be more excited to see what goes on. And I think they're going to be able to make whatever quarterback we have look good, even if they, aren't as good as they look. The wide receivers will help them out a ton. So I'm fully on board. Eric, final thoughts on Jahan Dotson?
Yeah. I don't think he hits 1,000 yards this season. I think he gets in the 800-yard range, but I think that's going to be a great season for him because I think there's just going to be a lot of balls to go around, and he will earn his keep next season for that.
How many touchdowns?
20. No, I'll put him somewhere in the like the 60 catch, 800-yard, probably 5 or 6 touchdown range. I don't know if he can duplicate 7 again. That was a pretty good season. He had a lot of close ones, but I think I'll take that stat line. If he wants to do better, that's fine too.
That's a strong season. Brian, what do you think, man? Final thoughts on Dotson, and what do you think he ends up with this year?
I think Dotson is going to have an impressive year, and I think one of the components we didn't ask or talk about in addition to it is the screen game. I think with Eric Bieniemy, he's going to bring their tight end screens, there's running back screens, there's wide receiver screens, all of those types of gadget plays that lead to big chunk yards. That's something that Jahan is going to. He's going to be the beneficiary of some of those, and those are just going to help to kind of pad those stats. So I can easily see him in the 70 catch range. I think 600 to 700 yards, and I think 8 to 9 touchdowns I think is reasonable because he's got ability. I mean, we saw in that New York Giants game, right? That spin move, I mean, that was electric. And then boom, he just kind of walks into the end zone. He's going to have plays like that where he puts a move on somebody and we're like, whoa, what just happened here? And then he's going to be in the end zone because he has that type of talent. So I think with this offense, he's going to pop. He's going to shine.
Yeah, I don't want to see him in the screen game. I don't want to see him around a lot of bodies.
The same thing. I was just thinking the exact same thing.
He's going to get some. Everyone's going to get screens. There's going to be so
is.
many screens this year.
Yeah. Oh well. So what I will say is like I've really enjoyed the progress of Dotson. I don't want to overinflate it because it was a rookie year. There are definitely some opportunities for progression. Man, is he exciting to watch. And I think the potential is just astronomical. We could really have something incredible on our hands here, but he's got to develop the rest of the way, right? Our fandom isn't going to get him there. It's up to him to put the work in and continue to work on those things that he needs to, including eliminating those lulls in games. Now, I don't know if he wasn't getting open or if the quarterback just wasn't used to playing with him, like Eric said, in terms of why he didn't get targets in those period, that stretch of the season. But I hope he has a consistent year, healthy all year. They said he had the best hands in the draft last year. Clean up those drops, bro, right? Like right away, please. So, but we are very fortunate to have Jahan Dotson. I cannot wait to see how he does in this Ravens practice situation they got going on and then into the regular season. This is Commanders Declassified. If you like your podcast on Apple and you haven't been able to find us, go search us again. We are there. All our episodes are being published. You may see to find the one that has the most recent episodes. Subscribe to that. Everybody else on all other platforms, you should be receiving our content. We appreciate you. And we'll be back with more wonderful Washington Commanders content. We are out of here. Peace.